What's going on, everybody? It is your favorite Apex Legends coach, Ninja Cowboy, back for another video. So actually, I had a comment on my last video, the Legends tier maker, or the Legends tier list, and it was actually an idea to make a weapons tier list because they like the Legends tier list. So shout out to that person. You can go check out the comments down below on my last video. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and we're going to make a weapon tier list for Apex Legends as it compares to competitive and ranked mostly, but I'll throw a couple tidbits in there for pubs as well. So let's get right into it. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and go in the order that this tier list that was already made by somebody else has, and they're starting with the AR, starting with the flatline. So seeing how many people use this gun to its maximum potential, it is an absolute banger. The flatline hits so hard. It puts out so much DPS. I think it's like 18 damage a bullet. Its fire rate is amazing. If you have any stock on it, the recoil isn't bad at all. Super easy to control. Really good at the hip fire and close range. Like, the gun is an absolute banger. Absolute banger. Super underutilized, though. A lot of people don't pick it up for that. Instead, they want to pick up the Hemlock or the Wingman or whatever, and those guns, you know, the Hemlock is, we'll get to that later, but the Wingman takes a lot more skill. So if you're not so confident in your shot, or maybe you're having a bad day, or you just want something that's a little more consistent in damage, close and long range, the flatline is absolutely a gun that you want to pick up. Is it an S tier gun? Not necessarily. I don't think it's an S tier. I don't think it surpasses that meta boundary, but I absolutely think that more people should be running this gun. So for now, I think we're just going to go ahead and throw it in the A tier. This is an absolute alpha gun. It's so strong, so versatile. We're going to throw it into alpha. The only thing that's holding it back, I would say, is the recoil pattern can get a little janky, and the fire rate is a little too slow to keep up with some of these other guns that we're going to be going through in the rest of this tier list. I'm also going to be trying to keep this video a little shorter, so we're going to try and get through the guns about 45 seconds a pop this time since there's a lot of guns. Next, moving on to the Scout. So the Scout, originally for the OGs of Apex Legends, you're going to remember that the Scout was a sniper for a very long time, so you could throw the 6X, the 8X on it, and you could use it from very, very long range very effectively. The range hasn't really changed. You can still use it very long range very effectively if you throw a 3X or a 2x4 on it, but now the fire rate was increased at a point in time and decreased at another point in time. The damage has changed multiple times. The different attachments that you can use on it have changed, but now it's in the assault rifle class. So it's going to be in there with the R301 and the flatline, the Hemi, all that goodness. So all that being said, I still think the Scout is a very strong gun. If you're looking at mid to long range, it is absolutely not the best because, again, we're going to get to the Hemlock here in a second and the R301 as well. I definitely think that if you're taking that long range fight and you want to give your Gibby a Scout to farm evos, if you're going to be holding a position early on and waiting for rotations to come through, I think the Scout is absolutely the way to go. It puts out a lot of damage and it doesn't take a lot of ammo to get your evos put up to purples or reds or whatever you're looking to do. So it's a really, really strong gun to use. The only huge downside of it is close range. Close range, unless you're just an absolute god tier flick master, you're most likely not going to be able to use it too effectively in the close range. Its hip fire is subpar at best, I'd say. It's not too consistent. You can get a couple lucky shots off, but for the most part, you definitely don't want to be hip firing this thing at any range. So I'm going to go ahead for those reasons. I'm going to throw this gun in the B tier because, again, it is very, very useful for farming evos and getting damage at long range for entry frags. But aside from that, it's kind of useless in the close range fight, which the majority of Apex Legends fights are going to be close, fast, and you need something that can handle that kind of pace. Okay, moving on. As you can see, this tier list has the guns and then the guns themselves with the hop up. I think I'm just going to skip the hop up part because double tap, I don't think anyone should ever use double tap. But aside from that, Slick Fire is not even in the game anymore. Hammer points would be good if they were on better guns, but they're just not on better guns. And then quick draw or skull piercer on the Wingman is kind of like preference more so than not. I think skull piercer is usually the better option, but it's up to preference. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to move on from those. I'm not going to worry about the hop ups. So we're going to move on to the next AR, that being the Hemlock. This gun is the most under-talked about, most overpowered gun in this game. You can 3-burst a Gibby with purple shields from 150 meters if you have a decent enough optic on it. It's absolutely way too strong. I think one max burst, if you hit all 3 bullets, comes out to 66 damage if you're not including headshots or fortify or any of that, just on a regular profile character. That it's an insane amount of damage. You can get a purple magazine on it, and that brings it up to 30 bullets. That's 10 bursts before you have to reload. Not to mention the fact that you can by default, you can hit it as select fire and put it to semi-automatic, which just gives you an insane amount of tap potential at longer ranges. So pretty much turns it into a faster shooting scout. And then close range, the hip fire accuracy on the Hemlock is nuts. If you're crouch spamming while you're hip firing at an enemy close range, you're almost guaranteed to hit 2 out of the 3 bullets of every burst as long as your aim is good enough. I'm giving you 44 damage a pop, not to mention headshots. So yeah, the Hemlock, absolutely, without a doubt, I think everyone in the comments will agree with me on this one that it is an S tier weapon. If you find a Hemlock and you're not feeling good about your wingman shot in that game or just in general, absolutely pick up the Hemlock. Slap any attachment on it, any optic, and you're going to be looking really, really good, especially for those entry frags. You're going to be an entry frag god with the Hemlock. The amount of times that I've been playing Gibby or one of the faster moving characters like Pathfinder and just been absolutely decimated by a 3-burst Hemlock, just nuts. The gun is super, super strong. Definitely recommend using it, especially if you're just getting into the game. Okay, now moving on to the next weapon. The OG of OG ARs, the one that has been consistently powerful from the release of the game till right now, is the R301. Its fire rate is really strong, close, long range, anything. Its hip fire accuracy is solid but not overpowered. Its damage is in the perfect spot that I think an AR should be hitting at. So if you hit your shots consistently, you can still one mag somebody with purple shields. If you miss a couple, you'll generally, if you hit a decently accurate spray, 50% of your shots, you'll usually hit for 80 to 90 damage. And that is perfect for an assault rifle, especially at the ranges that you should be using assault rifles at. I think where it falls off is a couple seasons ago, I want to say 2, maybe 3 seasons ago, they nerfed the R301 for some reason, changing its spray pattern to make it a little more random. So if you're someone who's new to the game and you're not too used to how to control spray patterns in Apex Legends, which is one of the most important mechanics in Apex Legends, then the R301 might be a little confusing at first as to how to control it, but once you get the hang of it, it's an absolute OG super beast gun. The big dick energy on this one. If you guys are using this and you're just absolute slamming kids from mid-range, this is the perfect gun. If you don't like to take those close-range fights and you want to dictate the pace of dictate the distance, and you want to keep them at that mid-range and keep them back, this is an absolute god-tier gun. I mean, would I ever recommend someone using an R301 over an R99 in a competitive atmosphere or ranked atmosphere? Generally speaking, no. Do I think you can get away with it? Absolutely, because like I said, as long as you're controlling the distance of your fights and making sure that they all stay mid to long range, the R301 is absolutely going to dominate. But then you go up against something like a Hemlock or a Scout, and the Scout is going to beat it out at those mid ranges. So it's kind of a give or take. It just depends on how you like to play. But I think generally speaking, this gun is absolutely up there. Not S tier. I can't put it into S tier just because anytime you have an R301 and you come across an R99 instead, you almost always want to swap, because as long as you're good enough with the weapon, the R99 can be just as strong at mid to long, or not long ranges, at mid ranges as an R301 can. So for that reason, we're going to go ahead, we're going to grab the R301, we're going to slap it into the A tier. Just not close enough to get to the S tier, but it's definitely, it's right on the cusp. It's maybe a centimeter away from being up into that S tier. Now, last for the ARs, we're looking at the Havoc. This is what I would say probably the hardest hitting gun in Apex Legends right now. There was a point in time, I think Season 5, where they buffed the Havoc super, super hard, and no one really even noticed how strong it was until EU ALGS matches started getting played, and teams like Alliance were running the Havoc and just absolutely bodying people from hundreds of meters away, hitting huge sprays. With or without turbocharger, this gun is nuts. It hits really, really hard. The only problem is the spray pattern and the recoil control is extremely, extremely difficult. Again, especially if you're newer to the game or newer to energy weapons. And then on top of that, most people don't run energy weapons, especially at the higher level. You don't really see energy weapons as much. It's generally heavy, light, and shotguns are the 3 that you're going to be seeing run. So if you're running low on ammo, unless you get lucky enough to find some in a building, you're most likely going to have to swap off that gun. But for early game, mid game, Havoc is an absolute banger, super underrated. But again, there are other factors going into that. Like right now, that with the turbocharger being in the game, unlike it was previously, you kind of need it to keep up with guns like the R99. The R99 is going to come out and burst you down way too quick, and there's generally nothing you can do about it. So all in all, I don't think there's too much to say on the Havoc. I'm going to put it down here at B tier, only because certain limitations that you experience outside of the gun itself. The gun is fine, but some of the other variables that you have to take into consideration are what's really holding this gun back from breaking into that A tier, that S tier. And at the end of the day, if you're running an energy weapon, you want to be running a Volt anyway. The things like an R301 and an R99 put together, but we're going to get into that here in just a second. Okay, moving on. The alternator. What I was going to say is the R99 attachment holder, the alternator. So the alternator, it had its day back when disruptor rounds were a thing, and it was super strong, way overpowered, but now, they got rid of disruptors, made it a normal gun again. It's not the worst gun in the game. Like, it beats out most other pistols, I'd say, aside from the Wingman, and most LMGs. I would rather have an alternator than an LMG in most case scenarios, but overall, generally speaking, this gun it doesn't keep up. There are way too many stronger guns. I would rather have an R3. I'd rather have a Flatline, Scout, Havoc, Hemlock, pretty much anything else. But I do like to pick this gun up instead of the RE45. It's definitely a step up from the RE45, but it's obviously a step down from the R3 and the R99. Now, if you get like a decent mag on it, throw a stock on it, and you hit your shots, it can compete. But the fire rate is weirdly slow. The hip fire accuracy is off and on. Maybe 50% of the time you'll be doing all right with it, which isn't saying much if 50% of the time you're doing all right. So for those reasons, I think obviously you only pick up an alternator until you find a better light weapon to swap it out with. So for those, I think that's an obvious D tier weapon. There are just multiple other guns that I would rather have on top of this one. It's just not viable. You should never, ever have an alternator late game unless you just absolutely are getting shit for loot. It's really not necessary to have that in your hands late game. Next up, we got one of my personal favorites, a gun that I think is really, really strong and a lot of fun to play with is the Prowler. Now, here's kind of the catch, right? Now that the Prowler's been put into the care package, it has a select fire automatically set onto it, and you can go full auto or burst at any point in time. But prior to the weapon going into the care package, it was floor loot for the longest time since release up until last season. Now, for a long time, if you got a select fire Prowler and you could put that thing on full auto, it was absolutely nutty. You could kill people in 7 or 8 shots, no problem. Tracking was super easy. Hip fire was super easy. The recoil is super, super low because it's supposed to be a burst gun. So having a select fire Prowler was really, really strong. And then it came to a point where out of nowhere, people kind of started to realize that having it on burst and using it almost exclusively hip fire was the strongest way to run that gun, especially right before they put it in the care package. I used to run it constantly, all the time as my close range weapon in my loadout to just be able to run up on people and hip fire them down and destroy them from almost any range. You could almost hip fire from mid range and still get good hits and get kills. So in or out of the care package, with the buffs that it got when it went into the care package, it does a little bit more damage and its recoil is a little more consistent. And it has the select fire already in it, or before when you could just absolutely run at kids full speed, W key, and hit that hip fire on them constantly. Either way, I think this gun is absolutely up there. But then, now you've got the setbacks to where I don't necessarily think, again, it's more like the Havoc where it might not be a bad gun on its own, but the guns that you're giving up to have that in your weapon slot is kind of the problem. So like you could have a Hemlock instead, and that's the obvious better competitor. You could have a Volt or an R9. Those are still, even with how strong it is, I think those are the better weapons to have just because as for consistency's sake. But I mean, if you pick it up in a care package late game and you just want to get in there close range on the zone, push bubbles and do a lot of damage, then it's definitely not a bad gun. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to throw this one up here in the B tier. It's going into the B tier only because unless you're running a controller or if you're just really, really good at controlling that specific gun's recoil, there are a lot of inconsistencies with the gun to where one game you might drop a 20 bomb with it and the next game you might only hit 3 bullets out of a whole magazine. So due to the inconsistencies, that's why it's not going to be in the A tier, it's going to be in the B tier instead. Next up, we have the R99. I'm going to click the R99, I'm going to put it in the S tier. We all know where it's going, we all know why. The recoil is super, super low. Any attachments on it and it's a god gun. Hits really hard. You can one mag givvies with red shields if you hit all your shots and a couple of headshots. They're everywhere on the ground. Light ammo is super easy to find, and if you don't have at least one R99 between the 3 of your teammates, then you're most likely going to get bodied. We're just going to go ahead and move right on from that one. Next up is the Volt. Now this is a big This was very controversial when the Volt first came out, and then the R9 got put back in floor loot because it was in the care package for a little while. People are always saying, if you run a Volt, you're this. If you run an R9, you're small PP, whatever, like all this different stuff. At the end of the day, I think they both have their place, and they're both very, very strong. But considering the R99's fire rate and how versatile it is at mid-range, close range, any range you really feel like, I think it edges the Volt out just by a bit. But then you go over to the Volt and you look at it at mid-range and it's just an absolute banger. And then you get up close with the hip fire, still strong. The fire rate's a little less than the R99, but every single gun is, so you can't really fault it for that. But I still think, even with all those differences in the guns, I still think that the Volt belongs in S tier right alongside the R99. You can put out just as much damage. You can one-mag people just as hard. The gun hits, and you're generally going to be the only person running energy on your team, so you get all the energy that you find. So running a Volt, you're absolutely going to smack. It's going to be a lot of fun, and if you're new to the game especially, I think the Volt is the perfect starter gun for someone who's brand new and doesn't really know how to control recoil or doesn't really know how to maneuver the map properly or use movement correctly. The Volt is definitely going to save you in a lot of those scenarios. Okay, now my least favorite as well as least recommended gun class to run is the LMGs. They have a place. They have a place in the game to an extent. I don't think the L-Star belongs in the game at all. It's definitely not the weakest gun in the game, but it doesn't belong up here in the C tier. And I think it's generally on par with the Alternator. It hits pretty hard. If you know how to control the cooldown speed, because you don't reload the gun, you just have it overheats, and then you have to do all these little animations and dumb shit. But if you can control that and manage it to make sure your gun never overheats, so you don't have to go through the whole animation, and you can put consistent fire down, then it is pretty strong. It's kind of underrated, but I still think at the end of the day, like, you're so much better off with any other gun really in the game. The Devo's going up into the S tier. I'm going to try and get through the LMGs pretty quick. I don't think anyone's really going to argue with me on the LMGs. The Devo's strong. It's really strong close range with the hip fire. It's really strong at mid range if you know how to control its recoil. If you let it get spun up, it's just hard when you have to respin the gun up. So if you don't have a turbocharger on it, like down here, then it's a little bit harder to manage. But at the end of the day, the spin up time is like a quarter of a second, maybe less. So the Devo is really strong. You can put down a lot of damage really fast, especially if someone's driving by you in a Trident or something. You can just fry the Trident and do a lot of damage. There was a point in time where the Devo is one of the strongest guns in the game, only because late game with those end circles being really small, you could just walk into the end circle holding left click and hip firing, get a bunch of kills. But now, due to the competitors and the way the meta has shifted, I think it definitely belongs in C tier. Lastly, the Spitfire, or what me and my friends like to call the never-ending gun. You can literally just hold left click for 1,000 years and just consistently put down damage, and sometimes that helps, sometimes it hurts. ADSing with this is kind of hard if you don't have a good optic on it and a good stock, just because the recoil is really inconsistent. The pattern is kind of up and out and all over the place. It does do a lot of damage, though. It puts down a lot of damage, and if you're trying to hold a position or something like that, you can just hold left click and aim it in the general direction of the enemy. You're probably going to hit at least 40% of your bullets. So with that being said, I think it could fit up into the B tier, but due to the fact that the recoil is insane, the reload time is super slow, you move slower with it, there's too many factors going against it, not enough going for it, especially considering the Hemlock and the Flatline are its two heavy weapon competitors when it comes to rifles. It really doesn't stand up against them. So for that reason, it's going to go into C tier with the Devotion. Okay, now here's another highly contested conversation amongst Apex Legends players, which is snipers. What kind of, what snipers should you run? Should you run snipers at all? Is there a better way, a better sniper to run here or there, or whatever the case is? I personally don't think any sniper other than the triple take and the charge rifle should be ran ever. I think the longbow and the sentinel are too high risk, not necessarily high risk, but too high skill requiring. Even if you're insane with them, why wouldn't you want to run a triple take or a charge rifle, which is just, charge rifles hit scan, so you literally just point and click and you hit your shots from any range in the map. And then the triple take can literally be used as a shotgun, and then you can also charge it up since it doesn't require precision choke anymore. You can charge it up and hit shots at range super easy. So for both of those reasons, I think the longbow and the sentinel are both going down at the F tier, because I think there's no reason you should ever be running either of those. And then the triple take and the charge rifle, they're both going to, the triple take is going to go up into the B tier because of its versatility and the fact that it can be used at shotgun range, hip firing. And then the charge rifle is going to go down into D tier only because having that gun means pretty much if you're in a mid to close range fight, you only have one gun. So it takes a lot of utility away from yourself. For that reason, I'm going to throw it down into the D tier. I wanted to get through snipers quick. I don't really think there's much of a conversation for snipers or LMGs. And then you've got the crab, which one shot to the head. The entry frag potential is insane. If you're good enough with it, you should absolutely run it. Let's put it in A tier. I don't necessarily think it's S tier. I think, you know, if you get up close and you miss a shot, that gives a lot of opportunity for an R9 to 1 mag you or something like that. So for those reasons, we're just going to go ahead and drop it down into A tier. Next, we're going to be getting into the shotguns, and that's where shit really gets juicy. So for the shotguns, I think we can just go ahead and start off. The PK is S tier. The PK is absolutely nuts. The Peacekeeper smacks, especially now that it's in a care package. If you get a PK, if you hear a PK in game anywhere in your vicinity, you call it out and you know that you have to play according to someone having a PK, because that gun hits so hard. A bad hip fire spray where you miss some of your pellets on someone at like 10 to 15 meters, you're still going to hit for 60 or 70 damage. So this gun is absolutely nuts. If you charge it at mid range, you can still hit for like 80 or 90 depending on who the legend is that you're hitting. So the PK, no argument, S tier every time, absolutely. Even before it got put in the care package, it was an S tier weapon. Now the EVA and the Mastiff. This is where things kind of get hairy. The EVA is the 8-shot, semi-automatic, shoots a lot faster. The Mastiff is the single shot, hits harder, can't hit as far, and shoots a lot slower. So I think majority of the time you're going to be running a Mastiff just because it does hit a lot harder. And if you're at the higher level of play and your movement is a lot better, there's a lot more you can do with a Mastiff because you only need about 2 shots and you can kill someone. But then you look at the lesser skilled players, or maybe the players that are less comfortable running a shotgun or running those close range engagements, they're going to want the EVA 8 because it's got a little bit more range. It's got a lot more bullets, so it's a lot more forgiving, and you can shoot it a lot faster, so you don't necessarily have to be exactly on target every single time, and you'll still get away with some success. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to throw both of these, surprising I know, both of these are going to be going up into the A tier because I've seen the Mastiff lose a lot of fights because it hits 13s or 14s and someone just gets destroyed with an R99 or a Volt or something like that, even like a Flatline R301, just because those guns are much more forgiving. And then the EVA would be down in B tier, but due to the fact that you can shoot 8 shots and some of those shots can hit 60s or 70s if you're close enough or if you put it on the right spot. So for that reason, they're both going to be put into A tier right alongside each other. And then we're just going to go ahead and click the Mozambique. We're going to throw it down here into the E tier. I still honestly think it's better than running a longbow or a sentinel, but without hammer points, it's almost useless. And except for picking it up right off drop, there really isn't any reason that you should ever have a Mozambique. Now, this video is running a little bit longer, but there's a lot of guns to get through, and I want to get some decent talking points on all of them. So I think these next two, we can just go ahead and blow through them. The RE45, it's better than the Mozambique, but it's definitely not that great of a gun. You should only have it off drop. And then the P2020 is going to be down here with the Mozambique because, again, I really think that you can get away with it more than you can get away with these snipers, but it's definitely not deserving of a much higher rank. It doesn't hit very hard, and without hammer points, it is entirely useless and pointless. Now, the last gun, the Wingman. This gun was the most overpowered weapon in Season 0, Season 1. It finally got nerfed in Season 2, and then it got nerfed again in Season 3, and it's been pretty much the same since Season 3 and 4, I think, if I remember correctly. But it's still a banger. You can hit 41 to 47, depending on the legend. And now that it has Skull Piercers back, you can hit 90 to 110 headshots. And then with the quick draw handle, your hip fire accuracy and your ADS time is a lot faster. So the gun only goes up to 8 bullets where it used to go up to 12, if you can imagine that. It used to start at 6 and go to 12 with a purple mag. If you hit your shots with a Wingman, you can melt somebody in 5 shots, no problem, even with red shields. With 4 shots, if they have purple shields, like, the gun is insane. So it's an S tier weapon. If you're good enough with it, I don't recommend it for new players. I think you need to get used to the game and how it plays and how to control weapons and how to move right. But if you know all those things already, the Wingman is an absolute S tier alpha beast. It's so strong and so hard to beat if you're going up against a player who actually knows what they're doing. So yeah, I think we burned through all the guns. I kind of had to rip through the end guns pretty quick, but I don't think there was too much of a discussion on any of the guns except for like the ARs and the SMGs. Those are really the only guns that needed an actual conversation. Other than that, I think most of these were pretty cut and dry. I mean, if you want to argue with me on a couple of these, like I got the Mozambique above the Sentinel and the longbow. I'm sure a lot of people are going to have a lot to say about that. Charge rifle being where it is, couple different things. So if you guys want to have a conversation about it, please go ahead and drop it down in the comments below and put a like, and stay tuned for more. If you can drop a subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. And you can hang out. I'm going to be making some more, maybe making some more tier lists, maybe doing some more coaching content. There's going to be a lot of stuff coming down the pipe. I got a lot of plans, especially for 2021. So this should be uploading first day of the new year. So happy new year. Welcome to 2021. We made it out of 2020 alive. At least I hope most of us did, and I'm sorry for anyone that didn't. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Let's start the new year with a bang. This has been your friendly Apex Legends coach, Ninja Cowboy. Peace.